Hey, what's going on guys? Acer and John here, and today we're going to be going over the This Week at Bungie for November 18th, 2021. But before we jump into it, I ask you want to keep up to date on all Destiny 2 news, information, leaks, tutorials, and more. There you go, and subscribe to my channel. Otherwise, let's jump into it. So starting off in the reminders department, there's not much going on here other than its double Nightfall rewards, and the weekly featured Nightfall is the Hollowed Lair, and the weekly featured Nightfall weapons are the Comedian Shotgun and the Shadow Price Auto Rifle. Nothing really worth grinding if you ask me, because we actually have a really big Twab focus on some major sandbox tuning going into the anniversary update. I'm actually going to do the bonus news now, and starting off, in an interview done I think earlier this week, Bungie ended up stating that any currently inaccessible catalysts like Whisper or Outbreak will be going into the general activity drop pool, just like other catalysts like Traveler's Chosen, for example. So what this means, if you're looking to get your hands on the Whisper Catalyst, well, starting with Witch Queen, you're going to be able to earn it through random drop via Crucible, Vanguard, or Gambit playlist completions. In other news, modders and data miners, Montague and Ginsor, have been working on a modded version of Destiny, which they're not going to publicly release because that'd be a very bad idea. Why? Because it'd probably get a lot of people banned and it would open the door for lots of hackers to backdoor the game. But anyways, he shared a screenshot where a Warlock is wearing 3 pieces of exotic Titan armor, 1 Hunter exotic, and a Hunter cloak, and is holding Whisper of the Worm as a primary weapon. If you want to see more stuff like this, I'll go ahead and leave his Twitter linked in the description down below. But moving on to the final piece of news for the week, Destiny 2, Beyond Light, Shadowkeep, and Forsaken are all leaving cloud and console. Xbox Game Pass, it's still going to be available on PC for now, but it is indeed leaving the cloud and console. What this means is if you don't purchase it before December 8th, you're going to end up losing access to Stasis, the Middle Tree Light subclasses supers, as well as any special areas included like raids or dungeons, for example. You'll still be able to use your weapons and gear apparently. Moving on into the TWAB, before we actually talk about the individual Hunter, Titan, and Warlock changes, let's go ahead and talk about leading up to December 7th, some general changes, and some goals that they're trying to achieve. Starting off with leading up to December 7th, they basically say that there's 19 days in between now and then, and nothing's pretty much going to happen other than there's going to be an early TWAB next week on Wednesday that's going to be very light because of Thanksgiving in the United States. But with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to some of the general changes and some of the goals. So first up, they end up comparing a Flux Grenade, which is the Arc Hunter Sticky Grenade, and the Firebolt Grenade, which is the Solar Warlock Circular Grenade that if you're in that circle, you end up getting tagged with it. So first up, they state that the Flux Grenade is getting increased base cooldown from 82 seconds to 182 seconds. The damage of the Flux Grenade is getting increased from 150 to 250, which makes it a one-shot kill in PvP. They're also increasing the PvE damage by 15% on top of a base damage increase, which we'll talk about later. They removed projectile tracking. They added a small amount of aim assist. They increased throw speed by 117%, and it now sticks to all surfaces. And then moving on to the Firebolt Grenade, they reduced the base cooldown from 82 seconds to 64 seconds. They reduced damage per bolt from 90 to 65, and they increased damage versus PvE by 15%. Basically, the whole idea here is they want the hard-hitting stuff to have longer cooldowns, and on the other side of the spectrum, they want the things that are more weaker to have a faster cooldown. So, while yes, the Sticky Grenade will now one-hit kill, it has almost double the cooldown. However, on the other side of the spectrum, well, it may take 3 Firebolt Grenades to kill a person now. It's going to come back way faster. They also decided to update the subclass screens, so that way when you're hovering over an ability, you can see the base cooldown, because obviously different abilities are going to have different cooldowns. All grenades are not going to have the same cooldown, all supers are not going to have the same cooldown, and all melees are not going to have the same cooldown. So this little tooltip in the UI is going to make it easier to keep track of things lanes. They also briefly state here that there is a technical issue where they can't show the class ability cooldowns on the subclass screens, but they plan to fix this at a later date. Moving on to their goals, they state the focus of making these changes is in preparation for the light subclasses 3.0 that's coming in year 5/Witch Queen. They also want to move PvP gameplay from abilities to gunplay. They said this a whole bunch. Moving on, they go and state that every single super is going to have a different recharge rate, kind of. They're basically split up into different tiers. At tier 5, which is the fastest regeneration, is only, well, Radiance. However, down at tier 1, which is the slowest, we got Spectral Blades, Fist of Havoc, Hammer Soul, Glacial Quake, Winter's Wrath. Basically some very tanky roaming supers. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to see where every super will end up sitting. Moving on to some neutral game subclass perks. The following abilities have had their ability energy regeneration reduced by roughly 50% in PvP only. Whisper of Shards, Arc Web, Rising Storm, Ionic Traces, Electrostatic Surge, Aftershocks, Inertia Override, Benevolent Dawn, Practice Makes Perfect, and Dark Matter. Next up with subclass and super perks. Basically, perks that scale down energy returns as you get kills in your super. In PvP only, they made it so the minimum energy refund is reached roughly twice as quickly for the Everlasting Fire and Dawnblade Warlock, and Trample with Striker Titan. No changes have been made to PvE. Next up here, we got a big list of PvP only exotic armor tuning. First up with Frosties, they made it so it no longer stats multiplicatively in PvP with other regeneration buffs, is now an additive scaler. With Heart of Inmost Light, ability energy regeneration scalers reduced to 50% in PvP. However, they state that they did rework this exotic a little to make it so activating multiple abilities will now reliably result in multiple empowered stacks. Previously was a bug, but they decided to make it a feature. With Controverse Hold, the duration of the grenade regeneration buff is no longer random between 1 and 4 seconds, and is now a fixed duration of 1.75 seconds. They reduced the grenade energy regeneration scaler by 50% in PvP. Doomfang Pauldrons reduce super energy gain on activation when an opposing player is killed by Void Melee by 50%. Shinobu's Vow reduce grenade energy gain on hits versus players by 66%. Crown of Tempest, grenade, melee, and super energy regeneration scaler buff duration reduced from 7 seconds to 4 seconds in PvP. And lastly, with the Stag, they reduced the class ability energy refund on shield break by 50% in PvP. Next up, the following armor mods have had their energy returns reduced by 50% in PvP. Melee Kickstart, Grenade Kickstart, Utility Kickstart, Perpetuation, Bolstering Detonation, Focusing Strike, Bomber, Outreach, Dynamo, Distribution, Momentum Transfer, and Impact Induction. And the final general change we're going to go over is with Stasis Crystals. While forming, Stasis Crystals now slow nearby players instead of freezing them. They still freeze PvE combatants while forming. They increase the slow/freeze radius while forming from 1.75 meters to 2.6 meters. They reduce crystal detonation damage versus players by 55%. They increase crystal detonation damage versus PvE combatants by 60%, and they increase crystal detonation radius from 6 meters to 8 meters. Now that we're done with all that, we can finally talk about the individual classes. To keep from my computer from dying while editing this, I'm not going to be showing any pictures really here. It's going to be all ears. Starting off with the Hunters here, with the Hunter Dodge, it no longer breaks projectile tracking. The Marksman Dodge, tier 10 mobility cooldown increased from 11 seconds to 14 seconds, and the base cooldown is unchanged at 29 seconds. And the Gambler's Dodge, tier 10 mobility cooldown increased from 11 seconds to 18 seconds, and the base cooldown duration from 29 seconds to 38 seconds. Moving on to the Revenant Stasis Hunter, the Shatterdive is much less lethal versus players due to stasis crystal changes. However, it is much more lethal versus combatants due to stasis crystal changes, and increase the shatter damage versus frozen PvE combatants by 100%. The Grim Harvest aspect, they also increased the fragment slots from 2 to 3. Next up with Top Tree Arc Strider, with the Combination Blow perk, they reduced base cooldown duration from 96 seconds to 15 seconds. And lastly, for Hunters, for the Bottom Tree Night Stalker, the Vanish and Smoke melee, they reduced base cooldown from 96 seconds to 75 seconds. Moving on to Titans, starting with the Shoulder Charge, all shoulder charges no longer one-shot players. Sprint activation time reduced from 1.5 to 1.25 seconds. They increased the range from 5.5 to 6.8 meters. The targeting cone width increased by 10%, and increased the damage versus PvE combatants by 25%. Next up was Seismic Strike, aka the Arc Shoulder Charge. They reduced the AoE damage from 90 to 40, and now blinds enemies in the area on hit, and increased the base cooldown from 82 seconds to 90 seconds. Then with the Shield Bash, the Void Shoulder Charge, they reduced the AoE damage from 90 to 40, and increased the base cooldown from 82 seconds to 90 seconds. And lastly, with Hammer Strike, the Solar Shoulder Charge, they reduced the direct impact damage from 170 to 120, and finally they increased the base cooldown from 82 seconds to 90 seconds. Next up with the Barricades for the Titan. With the Towering Barricade, they increased the base cooldown duration from 37 seconds to 40 seconds, and with the Rally Barricade, they reduced the base cooldown duration from 37 seconds to 32 seconds. Next up with the Behemoth Stasis Titan. With the Diamond Lance, they increased fragment slots from 1 to 3, and now spawns a Diamond Lance upon killing a PvE combatant with a stasis weapon, killing 3 players with stasis weapons in a single life, killing an enemy with a stasis ability, and lastly shattering an enemy. Then with the Shiver Strike, they increase Shiver Strike damage while in Glacial Quake by 50%, and with the Whisper of Chains, they increase damage resistance versus PvE combatants from 25% to 40%. And lastly, for Titans, for the Bottom Tree Striker subclass, starting out with Knockout, the melee lunge range and melee damage bonus now deactivate after a melee kill. Then with Trample, the super energy gain from Fist of Havoc light attack now decays to minimum amount over 3 PvP kills, down from 7. With the Frontal Assault melee, they increase the base cooldown from 82 seconds to 106 seconds. And with Fist of Havoc, the Heavy Slam radius reduced from 8 meters to 6 meters, bottom tree only. Then lastly, we go on to the Warlock, starting off with the Uncharged Warlock melee. They reduce melee range from 5.5 meters to 4.5 meters, now is the same as Hunter and Titan, and they reduce suppression time after melee. You can now melee back to back at the same speed as a Hunter and Titan. Moving on to Middle Tree Voidwalker with the handheld Supernova. They reduce damage versus players, now deals 150 damage max. Increase damage versus champions and bosses by 30%. Increase projectile range from 12 meters to 14 meters. And it now pushes targets away from the Warlock on detonation. And with the Nova Warp Super itself, they increase damage versus champions and bosses by 30%. And moving on to the final super that's getting tuning, that being the Shadebinder Stasis Warlock. Winter's Wrath now has reduced Shatter Pulse damage versus enemy supers. What this means is now you gotta freeze and shatter all supers twice to eliminate. The Penumbral Blast, they increase proximity detonation radius versus PvE combatants by 100%. And lastly, with the Bleak Watcher, while Bleak Watcher is equipped, all stasis grenades charge at the Glacier Grenade rate. That pretty much wraps things up. If you want my opinion, I think it sounds great. I mainly have to see it in game, but this sounds very, very good. I'm very excited for Subclasses 3.0 across the board. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you're interested in seeing the movies and the artists of the week, it'll be in the Twab link in the description down below. If you found this helpful, go and give a like. If you want to keep up to date on this kind of stuff, go ahead and subscribe. This was Ace Trainer John, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.